Welcome to the afternoon session of the second day. This session is called Arguing for Pure Experience. And the first speaker is Stephen Post, who's the Institute President, and he's a researcher in the health and social sciences, philosophy, and religion. He's at the medical school at State University of New York, Stony Brook. He's the author of many books and articles, and he's received awards for outstanding contributions to medicine, and I think you're in for a treat. So Stephen, the title of Stephen's talk is Consciousness, Mind, and the Deeply Forgetful. Hi everybody. Welcome back from lunch. We're going to watch a 4-minute video about a man named Henry. Can you hear me okay?
I have one resident that barely opened her eyes. She didn't respond. As much as I tried, I knew her for 2 years. No matter what I tried, massage wouldn't work, nothing worked. But when we got introduced to the iPod, and the family told me the things that she liked, it was amazing once we put the iPod on her. She started shaking her feet, started moving her head. Her son was just amazed. Okay, can we stop? Because now I'm getting all off. I'm seeing her all over again.
It's okay, as long as I can hear it.
Hi, Papa. Hi, Papa.
Huh?
How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm fine. Wait.
Who am I?
Wait a minute.
Okay, it's Sherry.
How long have you been in the nursing home? Approximately 10 years. He was having seizures, and my mother couldn't handle him at home. Of course it affected me greatly, because he was always, fun-loving, singing, every occasion he would come out with a song, no matter where he was. I remember as a child, he used to walk us down the street, me and my brother, and he would stop and just sing it in the rain. He would have us jumping and swinging around poles. He was, he was good. He was always into music, always loved singing, dancing.
His name is Henry Drea. And I'm looking more or less for religious music for him. Because he enjoys music and he always quotes the Bible. So I'd rather have that for him.
We first see Henry inert, maybe depressed, unresponsive, and almost unalive.
Henry.
Yeah?
Henry.
Yes, Joe.
I found your music. You want your music now?
Okay.
Let's try your music, okay? And then you tell me if it's too loud or not.
Then he is given an iPod containing, we know, his favorite music. And immediately he lights up. His face assumes expression, his eyes open wide. He starts to sing, to rock, and to move his arms, and he's being animated by the music.
And he used to always sit on the unit with his head like this. He didn't really talk to much people. And then when I introduced the music to him, this is his reaction every since.
The philosopher Kant once called music the quickening art, and Henry is being quickened. He's being brought to life.
Yeah?
I'm going to take the music for 1 second, okay? Just to ask you a few questions. Okay? I'm going to give it back to you. Okay.
The effect of this doesn't stop, which when the headphones are taken off, Henry, normally mute and virtually unable to answer the simplest yes or no questions, is quite voluble.
Henry,
Yeah?
do you like the iPod? Do you like the music you're hearing?
Yes.
Tell me about your music.
Well, I don't have one, I mean.
Do you like music?
Yeah, I'm crazy about music. You play beautiful music, beautiful sound. Beautiful.
Did you play music when you did you like music when you were young?
Yes, I went to big dances and things.
What was your favorite music when you were young?
I guess, Cab Calloway was my number one band guy. I like it.
What's your favorite Cab Calloway song?
Oh, I'll be home there for Christmas. Oh, you can count plans on me with plenty of snow near the toe. Present wrapped around your tree. Ow!
So in some sense, Henry is restored to himself. He has remembered who he is, and he's reacquired his identity for a while through the power of music.
What does music do to you?
It gives me this feeling of love. No man, right now the world needs to come into music, singing. You got beautiful music in. Beautiful, lovely. And I feel the band of love, the dream. The Lord came to me, made me holy. I'm a holy man. So he gave me this sound. So they say, I meet you. Let's see. Rosalie, won't you love me? Rosalie, won't you be sweet and kind?
With this beautiful new technology, you can have all the music which is significant for you in something as big as a matchbox or whatever. And I think this may be very, very important in helping to animate, organize, and bring a sense of identity back to people who are out of it. Otherwise, music will bring them back into it, into their own personhood, their own memories, their own autobiographies.
Music and memory is sweeping most of the world. Studies show that individuals who are in that moderate phase of Alzheimer's disease, who are accessing personalized music, listening to a song that they identify with deeply from earlier in life that really is part of their narrative. Just one dose of music and memory a day in a 10-minute period decreases the use of novel neuroleptics and all behavioral medications by 70%. The government of Canada has made iPods available to all people diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's disease from coast to coast. The state of Ohio, California, 15 states in the United States now are pursuing this, and many nations around the world, from Australia to Japan, find that this is the most meaningful intervention ever for the deeply forgetful. Years ago at Case Western, one of my colleagues, Peter Whitehouse, had discovered the so-called cholinergic hypothesis that the depletion of acetylcholine in the hippocampus was at least related to Alzheimer's disease. And a whole generation of pharma came along, cholinesterase inhibitors, that would boost up the amount of acetylcholine. But all that did was provide a little bit of word-finding advantage to people very, very early on in the diagnosis, and then it would fade. It also gave a little more attentiveness to tasks. And so instead of drinking one sip of water and then wandering away, you might have 3. But that was it. There was no effect on the overall decline
all the hype about a world without Alzheimer's disease evaporated. And indeed, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is a very effective drug, let's say that insulin for the treatment of diabetes might be a 9.5. The available drugs for Alzheimer's are probably a 0.05, less than 1. I would put this up at about a 7 or an 8. You know, there's no drug that can bring people back into their story, into their narrative, into their continuing self-identity. It does not exist. Poetry can be helpful. For many years I've worked with the Alzheimer's poetry organizations, reading well-known poems, Robert Frost's The Road Less Traveled, to people with dementia, and they will chime in and they will come back into themselves emotionally. They will become who they are. There are many interventions that are of great use. In New York, there's a big choir called the Unforgettables that's launched out of NYU, and they do performances around the city. It's caregivers and their beloved, deeply forgetful spouses or parents singing together in a choir. Indeed, this kind of intervention is so effective that some of the very good neuroscience journals are now talking about rementia, not dementia, but rementia, not to overstate it, but a slight recovery of capacities, of communicative capacities and emotional presence through the use of personalized music. So think about that. Everybody knew anecdotally that music made a big difference. When I was a boy, my grandmother died of what was probably Alzheimer's disease, although they didn't even use that term back then. And I would visit her in a nursing home. I'd help her with assisted oral feeding, and I would sing a song that I knew she liked. And whenever I did that, she would light up. You would probably know her because she wrote a lot of cookbooks and etiquette books and such things. So I'm a believer in using our moral imaginations to ask ourselves, what can we really do to connect with the deeply forgetful? It's an important question because, for example, in 1939, Nazi Germany began a program called Tiergestrasse 4 in Bonn, where several psychiatrists over a year and a half took 70,000 individuals out of asylums. About half of these individuals, it has been shown by historians, had probable Alzheimer's disease, or at least dementia syndromes. The others were developmentally, cognitively imperiled. And they left them to freeze out at night in the cold snow, in the vats of ice water. This was where the hypothermia experiments got started. And note, these were not Jews, these were not people of color, these were not discriminated against groups. These were, if you will, pure blood Aryans. They would be brought back into the asylums, and they would be warmed up at different temperatures, in hot water, in hot blowing air, to see if they could be brought back to life, which of course they couldn't. And the Nazis' justification for this was that they wanted to know at what point it would become futile to send rescue teams into the cold, icy waves of the North Atlantic to save downed pilots. Well, the German people reacted to T4, and those very same principal investigators went straight to Dachau and Auschwitz, and they continued the hypothermia experiments, perpetrating them on Jews and other groups. So how we think about the deeply forgetful, from me, from a fairly young age, has always been the test of the moral and spiritual fabric of a civilization. When I was a boy, I went up to a high school in New Hampshire called St. Paul's, and I had the honor of listening to a talk by a great artist by the name of Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell did covers for a magazine called the Saturday Evening Post. And this is one of his most famous ones. It's called The Golden Rule. Let me just get that up to full size here. Oops. Okay. And you'll see across the middle, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's certainly very deep in the Hindu tradition, but in all great spiritual traditions. Notice it's not the minimal version of the Golden Rule, do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. That doesn't take much. It just means you need to get home tonight and you can feel good about your life if you didn't elbow some innocent wayfarer in the street. But this is asking you to use your imaginations, asking yourselves, how can I contribute to the lives of others? This was 1961. And you'll notice there are people from every spiritual tradition, Muslims, Hindus, Jews, Christians. You've got the perhaps secular existentialist there in the middle with his denim jacket, having read a little Jean-Paul Sartre. Who knows? Wondering if there is anything as such as authentic generosity. There you have it. Young people, old people, men, women. They're all there. And if you look at their faces, there's a sense of tranquility. Look at every one of those faces. There's a sense of tranquility. Now, of course, neuroscience, thanks to the work of Jorge Moll at the NIH and many others who have replicated his studies, know that if you simply focus your mind on helping others, that it activates the mesolimbic pathway, that deeply evolved emotional part of the brain that is associated with feelings of fulfillment and happiness, that doles out one of the key 4 happiness chemicals. It's quite a remarkable image, actually. It injected this idea of a common humanity, a shared humanity, into American culture long before the Civil Rights Movement really got started in 1964 and 1965. So here is this artist using the right brain, the symbolic brain, the brain of a Joseph Campbell or a Mircea Eliade, the people I loved and worked with for many years, injecting these symbols into a culture and telling us that there is a oneness which is made of love. Of course, human beings have always been seeking oneness. You can read these books now on big history from 50,000 years ago, and what you discover is that people seek this oneness in 2 ways. They seek it Rockwell's way, a shared humanity, seeing the dignity and grace and magnificence of every human being. Or they seek it through elimination, they seek it through genocide, they seek it through extermination. And those are the 2 options. I'd written a book called Why Good Things Happen to Good People, and a lot of studies on how thinking about doing goodness and also operationalizing acts of kindness benefits mental health, physical health, and even on average for older adults allows them to live a little longer. So there's a lot of science behind this. I got to Stony Brook in the summer of 2008. I got a call from United Healthcare, which is a big managed healthcare system, and they wanted to know, is this really true? So we talked a bit, and what they went and did was in early 2010, they did a national survey across the U.S. of 5,000 adults, 18 and older. And they asked them, did you volunteer in 2009? 41% said yes, we volunteered. How long? On average, just 100 hours a year. Break it down, it's a couple of hours a week. And then the questions were asked. Did this make you feel happier? No definition there, just whatever you think happiness is, did this make you feel happier? 96% said yes, made me feel happier. That's pretty good, because at least our country is way down there in the low 30s in these international happiness surveys that come out from the University of Lancaster every year. Places like Mozambique are up high. They're simpler, less materialistic, but they have more community and they have more expectations of giving and supporting others. We asked them, does this make you feel physically healthier? 68% said yes. That's like getting off those carbohydrates, and feeling a little more energized. And this is key. 76% said helping others alleviated stress. Think of all the illnesses that are related to stress, from asthma to diabetes to you name it. 76% said it reduced anxiety. And here's a great figure. 78% said it helped them recover from loss and disappointment. In 2012, there was a terrible event at a school called Sandy Hook, a grade school in Newtown, Connecticut, where 6 teachers and 20 students were gunned down, very young kids. And I was up there poking around and interacting with some people. I know a few folks from Newtown. And here's what I noticed. You could walk into a Starbucks, by the way, and nobody was uttering a word. It was total silence. Everybody was so stunned, so shocked by this massive death. But if you looked on the bumpers of cars and of buses, and if you looked on the windows of the stores and on the doors in the neighborhoods, you know what it said? The bumper sticker said, "We are Sandy Hook. We choose love." We are Sandy Hook. We choose love. Not the love of chocolate, not the love of designer jeans. I'll give you a definition of love that I like to use because it doesn't involve any fancy languages. I think everybody can connect with it. And I borrow it in part from a psychiatrist at the University of Chicago named Harry Stack Sullivan, who was the most successful psychiatrist in world history when it comes to helping people with schizophrenia, because he recognized how much of a social, relational illness it was. He himself, being a wounded healer who had a schizophrenic episode in medical school in the early 1930s. He said, when the happiness, well-being, and security of another is as real to you as your own, you love that person. Think about it. You're looking over the crib of a grandchild if you got one. You're having a quiet moment with an old friend over a cup of tea at Starbucks. Your Mother Teresa helping poor people in Calcutta. Your Dame Cicely Saunders feeling called to work with people who are dying and founding the hospice movement. Your Jean Vanier working with the cognitively, developmentally disabled. However you think about this kind of love, it's deep. So let me give you that definition again. When the happiness, security, and well-being of another is as real to you as your own, you love that person. Some people, like Gandhi, love Muslims and Jews and Christians. And sometimes when they love everybody, like Rockwell has it up here, including the deeply forgetful, but when they love everybody, not just some small fragment of humanity, but everybody, well, they're a threat to those who only love, in that particular instance, Hindus. So Gandhi was assassinated. Rabin in Israel loved people of every tradition. He was gunned down by a radical Jew. Sadat, gunned down by the Egyptian Brotherhood. Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Mrs. Bhutto, Malala shot twice. the list is as long as my arm, because again, our goal, our ideal is always to affirm a shared and a common humanity, an exceptionless love, but regrettably, people get caught up in these very destructive, fragmentary loves that actually tend to depersonalize and dehumanize and even demonize outsiders. So, I heard the term happiness thrown about here over the last day and a half, and I just thought I'd begin with this because I think it is the secret. By the way, when I heard Rockwell speak, I was only about 14 years old at the time. That was a while back. He said something that was really interesting. You see the middle of this picture? Let me walk over here. Can you see this white circle? Can you see that? Yes? Okay. Rockwell, up there in a town called Stockbridge, Massachusetts, with Eric Erickson and Reinhold Niebuhr, he was a pretty spiritual guy. And what he believed, he loved all religions, he believed that if you lived according to this golden rule, that would be a window toward the divine, however you consider that, a supreme being, ultimate reality, ground of being, God, whatever. He thought that was a pathway toward whatever kind of spirituality is really worth having. So you see the white circle, the rabbi's shawl, the cape on this person to the left, and then it circles around. He actually thought that maybe, mystically, that love is like the energy of a light, some sort of mysterious reality that underlies the entire universe, that precedes the Big Bang, that existed before time and before space, and that in fact is the final meaning of life, and it's the only energy that is going to bring us, I think, through a lot of the problems that the world confronts now as a human species. So let me get a little bit now to the deeply forgetful. I think, therefore, trailing off, the sense that someone with an early diagnosis has of losing their capacities, losing the story of their lives. But I always like to say to people, so I've been involved with the Alzheimer's community for 35 years now, don't be hypercognitive. In that sense, I'm like Eva Kittay. I actually reject almost all modern philosophy ethically because it defines personhood in highly rational terms, Kantian or Lockean. You're a person if you could project plans into the future and operationalize them in the realization of goals, or if you can be an effective moral agent. I'm thinking Locke and Kant there. But in fact, I have been blessed to experience the creativity of the deeply forgetful. I remember being in Missouri once with the Alzheimer's chapter there, and they were starting an art program for the deeply forgetful and their carers. And there was one guy named Jim, and he couldn't communicate at all. You'd ask him something, you'd give him a certainly always a close-ended question. Do you like turkey or do you like chicken? You know, never an open-ended question, because that confuses the deeply forgetful and causes them some emotional turmoil. I got down to his level, I looked him in the eye, I said, Jim, what is that? Expecting an answer, but probably thinking that one would never come. And then one morning he said, this is a map so my daughter can get to my house. These things happen. Creativity is astonishing. The symbolic imagination is still very active. That's why people with deep forgetfulness can use rosary beads. That's why they can respond to pastoral care and chaplaincy programs and involve themselves in ritualistic activities. I knew the wife of Leander Keck, a New Testament scholar at Yale, Janet Keck, and she would wander around New Haven. People knew who she was. They'd get her back home. She got to a point where she could not communicate at all, but on Sunday morning she would come to the Yale Chapel on the Green, and she would chime in with these traditional hymns. She would say prayers and so forth because she could find herself in that symbolic environment. The emotional side. I was at a nursing home in Ohio with one of the great neurologists of the 20th century, Joseph Michael Foley, who died a couple of years ago. He headed neurology at Harvard and was the head of the American Neurological Association. And he loved the deeply forgetful. He had a love for them that was just a model for anybody in the field. So we went into this nursing home and to the special care unit for the deeply forgetful, and there were about 30 people in this unit. Now you could read a little biographical sketch on the wall about each individual. So I read about this fellow named Dave, and I walked up to him, I brought him over to a table, and I said, "Dave, how's Billy and Jack, his kids?" Again, giving him cues in language. There are whole books written about how to communicate effectively with the deeply forgetful. Never ask him an open-ended question, because again, it'll just cause panic. Well, he couldn't respond. But he had a twig in his hand. Little branch. And he looked at me, and with his incredible emotion of joy, it was not happiness, because happiness is just kind of trivial in a way. It's, a set point, comes and goes depending on externalities, but there was this effervescent joy in this guy. He handed this twig, he put it in my hands, and I received it appreciatively. I said, "Thank you." I gave it back to him a bit later. And I asked the nurse in charge, "Well, what's the story with this twig?" And she said, "Well, he grew up on a farm in Ohio, and he loved his father very much. His father was very good for him. And his father gave him a chore every morning, which was to bring kindling in for the fireplace. So like about half of people with dementia of the Alzheimer's type, he had gone back to that point earlier in his life that he associated most with tender, loving care, with the attachment of love. And then there was a little rag doll on the floor. It was one of these puppet dolls that you put on your hand. It was so beat up, it looked like it was 50 years old. He bent down, he picked it up, and he brought it to a woman in the corner who was whimpering on a chair, put it on her lap, and then wandered off, and she stopped crying. It turns out it was her doll. So the emotional life, the relational life, the somatic life. Remember Henry. Henry gets back into his identity somatically, bodily, right? He's moving his legs. He's getting rhythmic. This is universal, by the way, from the beginning of human history. Music and rhythm are definitive of the species. There he is. The aesthetic, the olfactory, smell. How much more time do we have? 5 minutes? Spirituality, tactile devices, and so forth. So the thing to remember is that we need to be inclusive, not exclusive. I'm not going to go into this in great depth, but I will say this. There was a great artist named Willem de Kooning who represented all the anxiety of the 20th century, modernity in much of its emptiness, I would say. And he painted that anxiety in these incredible abstract expressionist images. Well, he was diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's disease by Norm Relkin at Cornell Medical School. And for 14 years, he had progressive dementia. For 13 and a half of those 14 years, he lived in a Greenwich Village loft, and he had an assistant. And sporadically, unpredictably, Willem de Kooning would rise up, dip a brush in acrylic paint, and go up to the easel and paint. There was a posthumous exhibit of his work. The critics, some of the critics said, well, what an embarrassment. He's not the de Kooning we knew. He was a shell. He was gone. He was absent. He wasn't there anymore. He was half dead. All of those kinds of nasty metaphors. But in fact, bottom line is, this was a guy who, for 13 and a half years with progressive dementia, knew what he loved to do, which was to paint. So that's the real story of de Kooning. I'm going to say just a couple of things. One of the biggest issues of our time is the moral status of the deeply forgetful. Now, I happen to be a chaplain, and I do some pastoral care, and I meet a lot of people who are caring for their loved one with dementia, and they ask me, is he still there? Is she still there? And I have never had the audacity to say no. I've always taken at least an agnostic view. Even though there is this breakdown in neurological capacity and communicative skill, we can never say that the person in full memory is not there underneath it all. Some of you have heard of the British pediatrician John Lorber, who at Sheffield Children's Hospital did all the brain scan studies of young kids with water on the brain, hydrocephalus, and then they would be cured, they would grow up. Many of them had real difficulties, but actually about half of those kids with only 5% normal brain mass were getting through college, they were doing well in mathematics, they were having significant relationships, their memories were fine. There was an article in Science 5 years later that basically dismissed Lorber, but in the last 3 years there have been 4 or 5 major articles in Lancet and elsewhere that have actually replicated what he found. And so nobody associates now brain size with memory. And memory, incidentally, is the great mystery. What is memory? Some people have localized views, some people have globalized views. I actually still side with the great French philosopher Henri Bergson, who said that memory is non-material, that image, biographical memory is non-material. There may be certain kinds of habitual memories that are implanted in the brain, but in his great book, Matter and Memory, Bergson was a frank dualist, and he thought that a lot of these problems like dementia and so forth had to do with a breakdown in the structures of the brain that precluded normal downloading, if you will, of memory. And indeed, just a month ago in Science, there's a beautiful article by Fosdijk of Queen's University in Canada. And he actually makes the claim, building on work that's been in existence for 20 years now, that at least some aspect of memory is stored in something like a cloud. Now, if you're in a spiritual mood, we're talking about the one mind. We're talking about consciousness. We're talking about the idea that even though we may not have access to memory, and it may appear that the story of a life has evaporated, in fact, perhaps it hasn't. I'm not making a firm statement about this, but I do think that we need to be very open-minded about the continuity of personal identity and self-identity despite the struggles of deep forgetfulness. So my simple point, and I'll end up here, love, when the happiness, security, and well-being of another is as real to us as our own, we love that person. And a real good test case for love, better than all the pharma. You know, I worked with Peter Whitehouse on the cholinesterase inhibitor stuff, on Tacrin, and later on with Aricept with the multi-site studies. I got to tell you, there's nothing better than love for the deeply forgetful, and they matter too, because everybody matters, and that's where we need to go. Thanks.